Hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast focused on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and any other tangent that I happen to come up with. Whether you're a bourbon fan, a geek, a casual observer, someone just floating through this channel, I hope you find it interesting. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button, and hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. But if you can't find me, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com. I'll try to get that taken care of. I also generally live stream the recording of these episodes on YouTube on Wednesday nights around 9:30. Tonight we have a special instance because I'm going to be out of town next week, and so we're going to sneak one in on Friday. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or Twitter with the exact same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today is Friday, August the 19th, and I have joining me Devin and Chase from about 47 different things, but we'll start with you guys have a website and you do a whole bunch of research and you put it out there for folks like me to steal. I have two different types of episodes that I create, and one of them are, informational. I'll try to take three different brands and tie them together with some sort of a unique view or vision. And so I try to do a bunch of research, and I usually find myself on Mash and Grain website because already done the heavy lifting for me, and so I'm stealing it. But you guys also have a new brand or bottle or whatever you want to call it, blend that you're putting together called Borrowed Page that you're putting out. So we want to talk about both of those things and quite a bit more. He's got the bottle, he's holding it up there. Label is beautiful on it. I've read some things, so we'll get into that. But you guys have been around for a few years, and you started as we were talking about off stream, building a website where you do long form writing, blogging effectively, in a marketplace where the attention spans are getting shorter. So what kind of market research led you to say this is a good idea?
We did zero market research before we started the website. It's one of those things. We started during the pandemic, and it's kind of, I think, this moment for everyone across the country where people started reevaluating things. And, Devin was trying to find new ways to get more into whiskey. And I was dealing with isolation, trying to figure out ways to reconnect, with him and many of my other friends. And we just kind of came up with the idea. And I think the long format really wasn't by design so much as, when we were talking to people who are so passionate about what they were doing, and we were unable to censor some of those things, right? We just couldn't cut it down. We wanted to include as much as possible. And we kind of took the stance that the substance of what we were saying was more important than the brevity of it.
Yeah, I think something that, Chase and I have been friends for a long time. We met when we were 5 years old. So we've been friends for, blank amount of years. I'll let people kind of guess on that one. But, I'd been working in, sort of on the outer rim of the whiskey industry and wanted to get more involved and wanted to learn more about it. And I think one thing that we did notice that did sort of early on push us in the direction of more of the long form thing, although Chase is right, it wasn't like a hard and fast rule out the gate. But, we noticed that most of what's on the internet is tasting notes, right? It's 95% of what you're going to find about a specific distillery out there is just tasting notes. It's a subjective opinion. And, if they wrote anything about the distilleries at all, or the people at all, maybe you got 3 sentences, at most a couple paragraphs. There were very few people out there that were really telling the stories about the who, the why, the where of these distilleries. And with the craft whiskey movement, expanding so much over the last several decades, and the concept of American whiskey becoming so much more diverse than it had been in a while, we felt, maybe this was our opportunity. This was our chance to tell some stories that we felt like weren't being told.
And so I love that. And that's part of why I started doing what I was doing, because it became, it's almost like a comedic trope now within the whiskey nerd business, not necessarily within the industry itself, but within the people who are talking about the industry, to sort of bag on any brand that is telling a story, right? If you have a story to tell that is affiliated with your bottle, and most of the time with your craft brands, the story is closer to complete truth than historical brands. Like the people who are like, oh, we're using the same yeast that we use that our family used 100 years ago. That's likely not true, but you have folks like a part of your Berlin, like Alan Bishop, that's telling really unique stories with each offering that he has, and he's going out and doing some fun stuff. But whiskey nerds are like, nah, we don't care. We don't want to blind taste everything. We don't want to know what it is. We don't want to hear the story. We don't want to be influenced by it. But we also only represent probably like 3% of the marketplace. Like people like me, they 3% of the marketplace, and everyone else, they're going to read the story and be impacted by it. In the same way that you watch a movie and you're impacted, you listen to a song and you're impacted. It's a part of the complete experience. And so more of that needs to be out there, and tasting notes are virtually useless, right? Like, because it's what you tasted. And I read tasting notes where there's marzipan's the one everybody likes to make fun of. That's a Fred Minnick thing, and not many people have had marzipan in their life. Like, it's just because it's not a common flavor here. And there's another guy that makes fun of people for saying, oh, I taste currants, because currants aren't anything that grow in North America largely. That's like a European flavor, and you might have had jelly or whatever. And I occasionally give tasting notes because I want someone to sort of understand some basics or what I'm doing, and maybe they like whatever I'm writing, but you almost feel phony or fraud, because is that really what's in there? Is it really a banana, or is it just sort of like a banana? So I appreciate that. And long form is good. Why should we have to cut it short? This isn't a news article. It's your own website. You built it out, and you began with this mission statement around like shining a light on the spirit behind transformation of craft whiskey marketplace. This is like a website line that you have, and you've had it there since you began, right? So there's a tool on the internet called the Wayback Machine, and you can go to archive.org and you can look at a website, and it was kind of cached at a moment in time. You can see exactly what it was. And so sometimes I use that to gauge, are people like changing what they are just because the marketplace is? But the first version of your website and today's version of your website contain the exact same thing. So kudos to you. You're staying true to exactly who you are, but you started as a website. You wrote out all these things. You had these contact and interactions with tons of craft distillers. What put you in the position like, let's make a blend of whiskey now?
Well, I think it was always something that Chase and I sort of, toyed around with when we launched the company. When we started the website, we kind of thought like, this is what we want it to be, but I wonder how it could grow, and the concept of a blend and sourcing whiskey was a conversation early on. We knew that we wanted to work exclusively with craft, that we weren't going to be working with big people. We obviously wouldn't be getting stuff from MGP. Not that there's anything wrong with MGP or anything like that, but it wasn't part of the story that we wanted to tell, and actually like it, that's sort of where it stayed. And then we were working on the website, and I think I had this realization as I saw the American Single Malt Commission getting, the TTB closer and closer to recognizing American Single Malt. And, I think we're 60 days or however many days of notes process or whatever away from that being standardized. And that's incredible for American single malts as a category, for this country, for American whiskey. I have some opinions. Sorry, my dog has decided she wants to be a co-star here on this podcast.
Look, man, you're gonna get upstaged by a dog every time. Because it's
my favorite thing about her is that she started off screen, and then she was like, "Oh no, if I lay over here, I'm in the frame." And then she's closer, but she's now out of frame, and so I expect like a head to pop up on a shoulder at some point in time. She's right.
But she laid perfectly in for like just the small window that fit, and she was there.
When I saw her do that, I was, what a ham is the first thing that I thought.
She's made for internet fame for all 12 people watching.
She can't give me 10 minutes before but no.
Whatever tells the story, man.
I'm excited for American Single Malt. I have some thoughts and opinions on those standards, that they've introduced. I would have liked to see them be slightly different, but all in all, standardization is great for them, great for the category, great for American whiskey. So it's a great step forward. But realizing that American single malt was about to be standardized, I started to think about American whiskey, and I started to see, that sort of vague title, American whiskey, as sort of being maybe like the last true bastion of unbridled innovation and experimentation in American whiskey, because it's such a vague catch-all term for any American-made whiskey that doesn't meet one of the standards. And the second I started thinking about that, I started realizing, like, well, as American mash and grain, like, we shouldn't make bourbon, we shouldn't make rye, we shouldn't make single malt. We should blend all these different styles of whiskey together, because we could call that an American whiskey, and we could really start to play around with it. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool, if we could make a product that, was great on its own, right? But the sum of the parts was a phenomenal product, but also used kind of the distinctive aspects of the different styles of whiskey that we blended together as a way to further our mission, to expand on our ethos of shining a light back on the places where this is made. And sourcing whiskey and putting your label on it, that's not a novel concept anywhere, certainly not here in America. But one of the things that tends to rub people the wrong way is a lack of transparency, hiding behind non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality agreements. And so I thought, what if we went the other way? What if we put the labels of the whiskeys that, distilleries that we worked with right here on the front of the bottle? We were super straight up about what is in here and made that the story. Made, this new blend not only something that could maybe help to further the conversation of what American whiskey could be, but also stayed within our lane and ethos of who we are.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important piece, right? Having talked to a lot of craft producers out there, like all of them are really fixated about winning their backyard, right? They're a part of their immediate community. Their stories are so linked to being part of that community. And by developing a blended product that incorporates them, we're able to cross-pollinate, right? We're able to introduce people, in Columbus to spirits of French Lick or Whiskey Del Bac. And it's just like, when TV episodes have a crossover, right? You get two big episodes, two TV shows, and they come together, and all of a sudden there's more immediate tension and fanfare around it. We're trying to kind of recreate that, right? By bringing together two entities that might otherwise not cross paths, but have a similar mission, and allowing that product to have an even bigger footprint than either of them would in isolation, or even mash and grain in collaboration with them. So I think the idea of bringing these people together is both important from a storytelling standpoint, and the idea of a blend is so, goes back so long in whiskey that it just was kind of a natural concept for us to migrate into.
So I like that crossover concept. But if you really want to needle into the real nerds that are in whiskey, you need to do comic books. As a comic book crossover, you're effectively making the Avengers of the whiskey world, right?
You're talking to the right person, John.
Yeah, you're taking all the stars and putting them together into a single movie that now, and that's one of the things. So you mentioned the lack of transparency, and some American consumers get really upset about that. But the reality is, how many things do you buy that you have true transparency on where everything is coming from? We just get sort of bent out of shape on some of these luxury items, and we want to know it. But I think brands, and you guys are doing this because you have transparency, but brands can shift their mentality and say, this is actually a selling point, especially when we're blending together these four, because I may be a huge Spirits of French Lick fan, but I may know nothing about Whiskey Del Bac, and I want to see what you guys are going to do to my favorite Lee Sinclair by adding these other three. Do I like it? Do I think it's better? Do I think it's worse? And then now I've got to go buy these other three bottles to see how these all play together, right? And so you're kind of creating this great marketplace of expanding knowledge, and the real fans, they're probably going to do that, because I'm sitting here from a perspective of, you have Borrowed Page, which is a great name for this. This is perfect name for it, I think. Aside from maybe Whiskey Avengers, but I trademarked that on the side. So if you want it now, you have to pay me with those big blogging bucks that you got. But I had so on my shelf I have Lee Sinclair. I spent some time, visited French Lick last fall, picked up a few bottles. I've had a few bottles from before that. Obviously we talked about it off stream, but interviewed Alan Bishop. It was the second interview I did. Fantastic, love the dude. Picked up a bottle of Whiskey Del Bach on a website that was a single barrel, and I had the Watershed as a part of the Eve's blind. You may or may not know, but that was a C0801 GL, if I remember correctly. And I went through once I got all of them, and I did the blind tasting the way you're supposed to, but I saved a half a bottle of each one to kind of come back to it at the end and be like, all right, now let's rank them against each other. They're all, and that one ended up being at the top of my list. And that was the Watershed bottle. And it's, 130 proof Watershed. It was delicious, I thought. Of course, that's my opinion, and somebody else can taste it and be like, eh. But now there's this fourth person. Now I have to go out and figure out about Wiggle. And then, is it Wiggle or Wig? I assume it's Wiggle, right? Wiggle. That's the way I've heard it said from other people, but I also am going to ask. I've got to pick up the fourth one, and now I can better understand what you guys are doing, and that's sort of exciting. It's like collecting baseball cards. Anybody who's got a whiskey collection like this, ask them what they collected when they were kids. Was it baseball cards? Was it comic books? There's something. Maybe it was pocket knives. I don't know what you collected, but you collected something. You just grew up and you used your adult money to start collecting adult things now. So you're going after this idea of innovation. And I think you're right. And I have on here to come back to, I want to know what your notes are on American single malt that you think need to be different, because I'm interested in that as well. Last year they announced they had pushed a request TTB, I don't know, it was October or November of last year, and TTB was going to make a decision, and I literally watched TTB's newsletter for like 5 months waiting to see something come out, and I think I did everyone in the world a disservice because I gave up on it after about 5 months, and like 2 weeks later is when it hit. And if I'd have given up earlier, maybe it would have hit sooner and everybody would have been happier or whatever. But I think you're right. American whiskey can be a place of unbridled innovation, but are you concerned about any noise in the channel? Because there are no standards. You could also be competing with a host of other things and potentially have a negative connotation, because if you put the word blended on an American whiskey bottle in the United States right now, most people are like, oh, what does that mean? In Scotch world, it's a different thing. It's not as big a deal, but here, why is it blended? Is that a concern, or you think you can beat it?
Yeah, listen, I understand. I think part of the appeal, right, was because of the stigma, right? Mm-hmm. Like we wanted to lean in as like whiskey should be about innovation. It's an artistic expression. It's about, every local community is different. Maybe they have different, grains they weren't working in their mash bill, or they have a particularly curious or creative distiller at the helm, and we don't want distilleries, right, kind of conforming into what is some variation of a Kentucky or Tennessee bourbon, right, just because there are standards that dictate that. And so I think leaning into the American whiskey, which has the stigma, was a really big important piece to us. And when I try to explain it to some people, is like, yes, there are going to be people out there making bad blended products, right? Or maybe even making really good blended products, but their processes and their practices are bad, in terms of like transparency and where they're sourcing and things like that. That's fine, but like we kind of want to be that opposing force that's in there, that's trying to do it the right way, that's actually trying to get people warm to the idea of creativity, innovation, and like we don't need to get so stuck in the mud of like, how much corn is in it, and what state does it come from, and things like that. And I kind of liken it to like a musical group, right? Like if you find a band you really like, you're going to go get their album no matter what. And, even if the genre is broadly bad, like you're going to go follow that band. And if we can kind of build up a reputation of doing high quality things in a way that shares the limelight with people who are also doing high quality things for the right reasons, then ultimately, regardless of what stigma exists around American whiskey or blended whiskey, right? I think people, the true appreciators out there will see through that and kind of, I know we're all laughing because Harper's in the background, but we'll see through that and actually like get the value out of this product series that we're hoping that they will.
Okay. So you've mentioned it on here, right? So the four blends you've effectively avoided the state of Kentucky entirely. Was that like, did you set out to do that, or this is just how it worked?
Well, we actually 2 points on that. We actually have not yet featured a Kentucky craft distillery on the website. TBD on whether that might be in the works or not. Follow at Mash and Grain, plug. But part of this is also that we're not going to just work with anybody, and that's not to say that we are super picky about who we feature on the website, because as long as what you're doing, like Chase said, seems like you're actually doing it and you're doing it for the right reasons and you've got a great story to tell, like if you're willing to let us help tell that story, like, for the most part, we're happy to find some time to feature you on Mash and Grain. But nobody will ever be in Borrowed Page that hasn't already been featured on the website. And part of that's because we want to work with people that we know. We want to have whiskeys in this series that we believe in, and that we think are telling an interesting part of where American whiskey is going. So Kentucky's not in the bottle for Volume 1, but that's just because we haven't featured a Kentucky craft distillery on our website. Hopefully Borrowed Page becomes successful. The hope is that this is a limited series that we can release multiple times a year. Each volume will be different from the last. So, we'll work, Volume 2 will be different craft distilleries, different styles of whiskey, completely different from Volume 1. Volume 1 will never be replicated again. So once Volume 1 is sold out, it's gone. Volume 2.
Get it while supplies last, people out there.
Get it while supplies last. Talk about baseball cards, right?
But where can you get it? How about that?
Well, you can, as of right now, Volume 1 is exclusively sold on our website. So go to Mash and Grain. That's Mash, MASH, the letter N, Grain, GRAIN.com. And you can buy it there on our website. It ships to 40 states across the country. I don't have the 10 that it doesn't reach off the top of my head.
Sorry, Alaska and Hawaii.
Alaska, Hawaii, Rhode Island.
Rhode Island.
There's a better than average chance that it ends up being Kentucky and Tennessee as well. But
I think actually
they go there.
Those are on there. But the other thing I wanted to mention though is that we worked with a place called Bluegrass Bottling down in Kentucky, in Stanford, Kentucky. They helped us with this immensely. That's where all the barrels were shipped. Chase and I flew down to Kentucky in June for this volume. That's where it was blended. That's where it was bottled and packaged. So Kentucky does have its fingerprints on this bottle, but more in sort of helping us make this thing a reality.
Yeah, and that was it. I don't think I think if you had done it intentionally, I would like fully be on board with that, because at the end of the day, I mean, if you have a conversation about whiskey in the United States, it's going to largely center around Kentucky and or Tennessee. And there's 2,000 plus craft distilleries. There's not 2,000 plus craft distilleries in Kentucky. Most of the innovation is happening elsewhere. It's happening in Colorado. It's happening in Texas. It's happening in Washington. It's happening everywhere else, because you get a lot of tradition here. And it's like, oh, well, we've got to make sure we have a rye, which is not really true Kentucky thing, but whatever. And then there's, corn whiskey, or there's, White Lightning, or there's whatever. Like, it's a pretty standard playbook in the state of Kentucky, largely for most craft distillers.
Well, and I won't say that it wasn't intentional. I mean, we've been running the website for over 2 years. There is a reason why there isn't a Kentucky craft distillery on there now. And it's not because Kentucky craft distilleries are bad, but it's because, Kentucky's story has been told.
Yeah. It's being told. It's not even has been. It's being told on a regular basis.
Being told. It doesn't need American Mash and Grain's help.
Exactly.
Sort of sticking to sort of the evolution of what American whiskey can be. We've spent the first couple years, I would say, again, not intentionally leaving Kentucky out completely, but shining that light around the country a little bit more.
Yeah. I think if somebody in the state of Kentucky was like, I'm opening up a distillery and I'm focusing exclusively on American single malt, that's probably a story worth telling, because there's not anybody. I mean, there's some American single malts coming out of Kentucky, But I don't know anybody who's like, this is it. Our whole claim is right here. You know, usually we'll start with a rye, then we'll have a bourbon, and then we'll talk about doing something fun afterwards. You know, whatever else.
And there's been a really interesting, like, by no design going into it, there's been kind of an interesting pattern we see emerge, right? Like, there are some people that are innovating, you know, completely independent of everyone else because they're just innovators. But we're also like the whole larger regionalization of what does a mid-Atlantic whiskey look like, separate from a Pacific Northwest, separate from a Southwest, or even specifically Texas and Colorado. And it's really interesting to see that kind of be defined in real time. And you know, to your point, Kentucky's whiskey, its story has been told and continues to be told, but like they've already gone through that learning curve. And like what we're seeing in these other regions of the US is like, you know, the people doing it and producing these things are actually actively defining what their style of whiskey should look like. And some of them are reaching way back into history, and some of them are looking forward into kind of science fiction. And it's really cool to kind of be just, you know, using Mash and Grain as a platform to help other people understand those learnings and definings that are coming about.
Yeah, and I think craft whiskey, and specifically non-Kentucky craft whiskey, is getting a pretty strong spotlight, and it feels like you guys have slid it right into an appropriate time frame, because I think about what the folks at Lost Lantern are doing, and they're doing one-offs of a lot of small craft distilleries, and I think about what Marion Eves did with her Blind series, and it was all non-Kentucky whiskeys. And then you know, the guys at Blind Barrels, and they're focusing pretty heavily on craft distilleries and bringing unique things that are happening across the United States. And you know, it's similar to what happened in beer in the United States, you know, like 25 years ago, where, you know, a handful of craft folks came out and everybody, you know, latched onto them, and those folks grew into major brands. So, you know, Wilderness Trail is a prime example. They started off as craft, and now they're a heritage brand, but they're only like 10 years old. You know, you went from non-existent to heritage in 10 years because you built it up. But there's this second wave of innovation that comes in. It's like, we want to be craft, and we may actually want to be intentionally small so we can continue to do incredibly innovative things, because when you're only putting out a couple of barrels a day, it's easier to make that modification than it is if you're running a factory line and you're putting out 5 million barrels a year or whatever, you know, whatever the insane number happens to be. But coming in and saying, we're okay with picking up what these craft distillers are doing and creating a unique blend. And that's one of the, you know, I have these things that I think are, you know, encouraging trends in whiskey, and American Single Malt's one, and the idea of finishing is another one. And then another one is the idea of blending. You know, it's happening in mainstream for folks that are using MGP, and there's nothing wrong with it, but there doesn't necessarily need to be another MGP brand out there. You know, there's plenty of them. You can find them. They pop up every day. It's okay. And it's good whiskey. That's the reason why it's there. But you think about what Aaron at Smoke Wagon is doing, and he's creating unique blends using explicitly MGP whiskey. And people are like, you don't actually make anything besides blending, but we're okay with that. So that tide's shifting a touch. So I think what the long way to say this is this feels like the appropriate time for that to happen. You know, what you guys are doing.
Thank you. Yeah.
So how did you go about selecting these four specific? So, and I think I ran over them, but we'll kind of double back and say again, in this blend, there is, and I'll let you guys say, because you know the percentages maybe, or the factos from the website that I did not read off.
Yeah, I think I've got the percentages right, and you know, for anybody who is listening or watching, if I get this wrong, you know, be kind on the internet. Yeah. But I believe it's 34% straight bourbon from Watershed Distillery in Columbus, Ohio. It's 32% straight rye whiskey from Wiggle Whiskey out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 24% Lee Sinclair bourbon out of Spirits of French Lick in French Lick or West Baden, Indiana. And then 10% Whiskey Del Bac. There you go, a little Spirits of French Lick there. 10% Whiskey Del Bac, which is a mesquite smoked single malt whiskey out of Tucson, Arizona. So yeah, I mean, I'll tell you that, you know, the real story of how this thing started. So, you know, we had the idea, maybe we'll release a blend at some point. Mm-hmm. Then I kind of had this American whiskey epiphany, you know, let's push back against the stigma. Let's be part of, you know, this next chapter. And also like let's differentiate ourselves, right? I mean, something that we learned so much in talking to all these craft whiskey distilleries is how do you differentiate yourself? There is no company, as far as I know, that exclusively focuses on producing American whiskey. It does not produce a bourbon, does not, similar to the Kentucky single malt thing. There's nobody out there that only does this and doesn't also throw out a bourbon or a rye.
Right.
So it's a point of differentiation. So we had these concepts, but they were just kind of there. I have worked for the last couple of years in a variety of different roles at Kings County Distillery in Brooklyn, New York. I was working there and signed up to lead a tasting class when I was told that Greg Lehman from Watershed Distillery was coming through, and we had just recently featured Watershed, so I had established somewhat of a relationship. So I said I'll give Greg and his guest a private tour of the distillery after the tasting. So Greg came, he sat through my tasting, which hopefully was not too unbearable to sit through, and then I gave him a private tour. And at one point, he asked me straight up, like, how's American Mash and Grain? Like, what's going on with that? And I don't know where I got the boldness or whatever, but I was just kind of like, I'm just going to shoot my shot here. I
Right.
sort of pitched him the concept. Like, this is something we're thinking about doing sometime in the future. And Greg, being the like sweetheart, humble dude that he is, was like, well, like, sounds like a great idea. If you guys would ever be willing to consider us for, to be a part of it, like, we would love to. And and in my brain and in my heart, it's like jumping up and down and freaking out. I called Chase immediately after that.
But on the outside, you're like, be cool, be cool, be cool, right?
And Greg was super helpful early on. There was an idea that maybe the whole thing would actually even happen at Watershed, that they would be the facility where we sent the barrels and that we'd get it blended there. That didn't end up working out with their production schedule, which is how we sort of had to, one of the many reassessment periods over the last, year or so that led us to Bluegrass Bottling, who again were wonderful. Lisa and her team there are just great. But then, we hopped on a phone with Greg and Ann Demick, who at the time was working at Watershed as their sort of like barrel master and kind of jack of all trades whiskey, expert. And they were awesome. They sat with us. They walked us through like, how could we actually make this happen? Everything from like, what do we maybe need from a legal standpoint? How much might this cost? What are we talking about a timeline? And that was, invaluable information. And Chase and I just kind of ran with it from there. My first ever job in whiskey was as a New York City brand ambassador for Wiggle in Pennsylvania. And they've got a really great story. They're the most awarded craft whiskey distillery in America. They have revitalized kind of an old school style of rye whiskey. They're using Monongahela rye, which at one point was the most popular style of rye whiskey in this country. So I just thought, and they're super all about education and innovation. So, I reached out to Meredith and Alex at Wiggle and was pumped that they were into it. We reached out to Alan Bishop at Spirits of French Lick because we just thought, like, here's a super cool dude who's doing super cool stuff. And we had a feeling like maybe he could be into this. And Alan was super enthusiastic about it and continues to be a great champion of Borrowed Page. So we love Alan Bishop. And then, when we were thinking about a whiskey that could maybe kind of be a proof of concept of that, making something that's great altogether, but also you can use distinctive aspects to sort of shine a light back. We were thinking, well, what's a whiskey that could really be a proof of concept of that? And immediately I was like, mesquite smoked single malt out of Arizona sounds pretty, unique and has a very specific flavor profile. So we went back to them and they were, they were on board too. And we had a couple strikeouts. I won't mention, the strikeouts, but, we were lucky enough to get these 4 distilleries on board and excited about it.
Yeah, just add a little bit of color because that was comprehensive and fantastic. A couple things like one throughout the process of trying to build this, aside from like, yes, we talked to everyone, we got to know the people involved, we got to taste all the products, we got to make sure that we kind of liked the quality, we had an idea of what would be going into the blend. The community aspect to really make this thing come to life can't be understated. Like Devin has highlighted a bunch of people, like, what Greg Lehman and Andemic did to get us started was instrumental. And, a fun fact on that front, just because I like to share it. Greg Lehman in outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's my wife's hometown, and his father was my wife's volleyball coach back when she was in high school. So when we started going, my in-laws had run into his parents in the grocery store, like, oh, they're going to do it. Is this going to be a thing? And so and they were great champions early on, along with everyone. And I just, for a website that started as a blog on kind of just a concept basis that wanted to celebrate all of these individuals, for them to kind of in return show the support and share the enthusiasm for the things that we were working on was actually unexpected and really appreciated. We just couldn't have done it without these early people taking a chance on us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the concept, I'll say the concept for this whiskey got so much enthusiasm and so much support from basically anybody that we talked to about it, and that's from the distilleries all the way through like the people where we get our glass, the people that give us our toppers, like every aspect. We were met with such enthusiasm. It was a daunting task, and it was hard work, and there were a lot of challenges, but that fuse got lit by Greg that night, and I feel like propane or gasoline just kept getting thrown onto the fire. Mm-hmm. Like it just the fuel to burn this thing and get it done was really overwhelming, really humbling, and especially for these distilleries, craft distilleries, to take a chance on us, two people who have only a couple of years exposure in the business, absolutely zero credibility or evidence that we can blend anything together. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you, at that point, I hadn't even when we started doing this, I hadn't even messed around with bottles in my collection. Right. It kind of blows me away that any of them said yes, but we're blessed that they did.
And I don't know if blessed is the appropriate term. I think you had an idea and a passion, and they could see that. And I can only imagine, from a distiller's perspective, this is probably the kind of thing that they absolutely want to participate in. But if they're the ones that champion the idea and they ask 3 people to join them, and they've got a half a dozen other really solid friends that are distillers, it's like, well, why didn't you invite me? Well, why am I not on the list? And so they're in a position now, because from what I've seen, largely the distillery community, the whiskey community, they're all pretty friendly. They're willing to help each other out. They're competing for market share, but they want to win because theirs is better, not because they made sure they bought up all the bottles that somebody else would use to bottle up their whiskey so you can't put it on the shelf. It's not that kind of a cutthroat environment. But if you wanted to do this type of an experiment, you're going to leave a friend out, and then the friend's going to be mad at you, and then you're going to have to deal with them at the next whiskey expo you're at or whatever. So it's not surprising that they're like, yeah, let's do this. And now I'm like, well, no, it was Devin and Chase. They put the list together. Go yell at them, right? You guys are it now. Y'all are the reason they can blame you while participating in a fun thing.
Always volume 2.
Always. I think you're right, and I think a lot of them they're all experimenting and innovating so much in their own lane.
Do they even have time to consider that?
And their appetite to see, well, what is the boundary of whiskey? Where is it? Can we ever find it? Is it limitless in its nature? And so when they hear about us and when we met them, and they know we're honest actors in the space, because our relationship had really came from a place of, we want to help you succeed. We want to help tell your story, right, and get that out there. And then we came to this idea, hey, let's see where that boundary is. Can quality exist without these kind of standards of single malt or bourbon or rye and things like that. And like,
Mm-hmm.
can we take a native Southwest whiskey and a Central America, Central Ohio, Central USA kind of whiskey and bring them together and things? And like, the answer I think is undoubtedly yes, and I think it's yes to the point where the canvas, like that landscape of what whiskey can be, is seems even bigger now to me than when we started this project.
Yeah, and you have a better blank slate than anybody else because and because American single malt still is kind of unfettered and they can call it whatever they want to until that's adopted. But just by the name, there is somewhat of an expectation from the American consumer that a single malt is going to be that. You could do it without it being truly a single malt, but the consumer has an idea. But just saying American whiskey or American blended whiskey, sort of the gloves are off there. And I think what you may find, and you can tell me if I'm wrong in a year's time, whenever you're on the Borrowed Page batch 17 or whatever the number happens to be in a year.
17 is ambitious, but I hear you.
I mean, well, when you sell through this by the end of the month and you're like, oh, we've got to have something else. And then now you've got distillers calling you being like, hey, let's do this. It could go fast, but I think you're going to end up, like, if you end up at a whiskey expo or whatever, you're going to have tons of jerks like me coming up and being like, I have an idea for you. Here's the people you need to blend. And that's going to be interesting. Like, it's because it's going to be a drunk guy. It's like, you need to blend these 5 together. And you're like, no, that's not how it works. But do you have picked what number 2 is going to be?
Chase and I have had multiple conversations. The list, I'll say there's some people that have stayed on that list. There's some people that seem to sort of move in and out. I'll say that with, I can't talk about who we're thinking about for volume 2 because we haven't asked them yet. But
right.
But I will say that with the people that we're thinking about, volume 2 will be a very different whiskey from volume 1.
Right. And I think, if you see, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think that's important, right? Like we can all enjoy nuance and subtlety, but like when we're so early and we're trying to define this as kind of a series that isn't bound by standards, we do kind of need to lean another direction. And like I said, we're feeling, we're trying to find the boundaries, right? And we can't just go in one direction and do that. And I think that the ambition is, who we talk to that's doing something completely unrelated or unrelatable to the distilleries and the brands that we have in there right now.
And I think you will see success with this. I think I feel pretty confident about it. But is 4 the number, or you kind of, do you have a number that you're looking for? Is it always going to be 4? Is it going to be 3, 5, or you just whatever works is what works?
It's hard to say. I feel it's hard to say. 4 felt right for this one. I think we had tossed around 3 maybe early on, and what's great about Borrowed Page Volume 1 is it's 4 distilleries, it's 4 barrels, right? Each one of them has 1 barrel of whiskey in here. Whiskey Dalbacks was a tiny little guy, and that's nice. There's a nice balance to that. I think there was a nice sort of entry blend for us to handle. But volume 2, maybe it'll be 3 distilleries, but it'll be 2 barrels from each one, or maybe it'll be 4 with 2 again. And I think at the end of the day, we'll make the decision off of what we think makes the best whiskey, not off of like, it needs to be 4, or it needs to be 4 barrels, or it needs to be 8 barrels. Like, there's 724 bottles produced from volume 1. Would I love for there to be 1,500 or 1,600 or 1,800 bottles produced for volume 2? Sure. But we'll always make the decision based on what is going to make the best whiskey, what's going to be the next step forward for Borrowed Page.
Yeah, I think it's a really important way to think about it. And a lot of this is driven from like, all right, let's not adhere to standards. So we don't want to self-impose things, right? Like 4 is an arbitrary number. It worked really well for us in this moment. But looking forward, like we're a company, a platform that is changing, evolving. We're curiosity driven, and that because of those things, it's hard to kind of commit to something. And then you take in the fact that we're working with craft producers who are inherently innovating and being curious and creative in their own right, and to try and project out, what standard things are going to be, I think is impossible. I think, the things that we commit to, right, is it has to be craft, because there's value in that for us as a platform. That's what we exist. That's our ethos, that we want to shine a light of that. And it has to be a product that we think elevates, the sum of the parts, and something that Devin and I are proud of. And outside of those two things, I think everything else is subject to curiosity, creativity, and innovation.
Mm-hmm. All right, I have to dig through my notes. I don't take notes in a linear fashion. There's a lot of scratch here, so you have to bear with me. I scratch through stuff as I ask questions. So you mentioned that you have a selling point here, right? So if you buy one bottle of Borrowed Page, you're effectively buying 4 single barrels of each one of these brands, because it's a single barrel going in here, and everybody's all about a single barrel. You got to have a single barrel. So buy one bottle, you knock out, you knock out a Lee Sinclair, you knock out a Del Bach, you knock out the Wiggle, and you knock out the Watershed. You got a single barrel of everybody, and you're happy, and you just save some money, and you bought a bottle. But
it's a great way to think about it in terms of the price. What a value!
Yeah. Incredible value. Incredible.
This is a value product.
It is. It's a value product without being priced out of this world, but you're still getting a high quality thing here.
That's an art, figuring out how to price something too. That's not easy.
I've learned everything's an art. Finding the bottle topper is an art. It's like nothing is easy making this happen.
In a post-COVID world, from what I understand of supply chain, that's incredibly true. But I work with a bunch of software engineers, and they say the most difficult thing for them is not solving the problem. It's figuring out how to name things. Like you got to name this value, you got to name this value. Just like naming things.
Also a big challenge.
But yeah, I would say
you're stuck with it.
Chase and I, friends for, again, fill in the blank number of years.
At least 16. It's at least 16 years. Because if you were 5 and you have to be 21 to own a whiskey, it's at least 16 years. Yeah, I wrote that down to come back to. I'm like, it's at least a 16-year friendship.
At least 16 is nice for anybody that might be scared by that number. It is significantly higher than 16. But I'll say, on the price aspect, I agree. I think it's a great value. It's probably the biggest continuous argument that Chase and I had over the course of this thing.
Yeah, it was.
Who's arguing for more and who's arguing for less? Like that, which side of the fence is?
I'm down at last.
You're lower and he's higher. All right. So, but who won the most?
I think it was I was gonna say I think it's a compromise.
Yeah, it was a good compromise.
Yeah, if you had seen my starting number, you would say I lost. But I think it's.
But you don't start with the actual number you want, right? Like in a negotiation, you start at a different number so you can come to what you want.
Actually,
I couldn't have even justified lower than I wanted. Right? Yeah, I don't think I could even straight face, because that's just an aggressive loss. It's a fine balance, the pricing piece, because the quality of product, you said it, even if it was just a single barrel of any of these high quality producers, it's in the 80+ range, right? I think that's an easy thing to claim. And then you say, all right, not only that, there's the craft and the innovation of actually bringing it together into one unique expression. So there's inherent value in that. For us to come in at $75, now granted, there's tax and there's shipping, because we're all online retail, so you can't go to a shelf and buy it. There's always going to be shipping. For us to come in at $75, I think Devin had a very good claim that we were undervaluing what the product was. Me coming more from the marketing side of things and the business development side of things is like, but we've never done it before, right? And we need to sell the damn thing, right? So like there's no version of this reality that's a failure outside of forever being stuck with a bunch of product that we can't sell. Right. So like, at least in this initial iteration, we needed to get to a point that didn't undervalue it so aggressively that we made it seem cheaper than what it was, but also at a point that we we could sell it. And I think we found the right sweet spot, in that compromise. I also like the idea of going back to the underlying mission of the platform, which is to shine a light on these craft producers. Like, if we were to go say it's $120 bottle of whiskey, like, are we really exposing people who've never heard of one or multiples of these distilleries to that product? Probably not as effectively as we would have wanted. And so, like, there is this underlying drive to, like, make sure the product can get out there and people can talk about it and experience it and be exposed to these new producers.
And I would challenge, I think, that even at $75, you are undervalued at $75. I would agree with that entirely. I mean, think about Barrel Craft Spirits. Whenever they first hit the marketplace, I don't know that they priced anything under $99, and they had never done it before either. Now, they were at a higher volume of bottles that they were selling. But even at that, they're at a higher volume and they're still charging $99, and no question about it. I think you're okay.
I think the way Chase and I were thinking about it is that because like Chase mentioned, it's exclusively an online product, so you're paying tax, you're paying shipping on this. Although I will say, if you buy in bulk, you get free shipping.
4 more bottles, no shipping.
4 more bottles, and you don't pay shipping on this. But
if you buy 4 bottles, you have the equivalent of 4 single barrel bottles for sure now, because if your ratios work out, you got there. So you need to get 4 so you can.
We were thinking we wanted to keep this for the consumer, that nobody's going to spend $100 on this whiskey when you factor tax in, when you factor shipping, and I think that around that $100 mark, that's getting closer to the value of what this product is. But we wanted to make sure that everybody was going to be able to get this product for under that amount of money at the end of the day, all things said and done.
Yeah. Go ahead. My last thing I'll say is, like, once we sell out of volume 1 and we have a track record of sales, and, like, we can go back and look at it. But I do ultimately like that we're trying to price it at a point that's favorable to getting the whiskey in the hands of the people. Because the mission isn't for like the mission statement on our website has never been, we want to make money selling whiskey. We want to go. The mission statement is that we want to elevate the profile of craft whiskey, right? And we're not going to do that by pricing out people and excluding people based off of the price point of the bottle.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in looking at it from a limited edition perspective, you're looking at, you will have 1 or 4, if you buy all 4, so you get free shipping, of 724 bottles. That's all there is of this particular product. And there's something to be said for exclusivity and the ability to be able to have a unique version of whatever. But going back to, you have these 4 barrels that you dumped in. Did your ratios work where you just said, I'm dumping the whole barrel, or is there some left over? Like, did you say, okay, no, we're going to actually put in, 75% of this barrel, 100% of this barrel, 30% of this barrel to get your blend, and then you're left over with like this other stuff that didn't go in? Or did you just say these ratios work?
So, this is where, so I would describe the latter thing that you said as what we might have called like nightmare scenario. We had a lot of conversations kind of earlier, middle on in this project about sort of, if we don't throw all these everything in these barrels in, what do we do? Because we've now paid for product that's in a barrel. We're going to be paying taxes on these barrels, and maybe we dump everything of 1 barrel, but then half of this, and then it's like, because initially we were like, well, maybe we could siphon what's left over off into single barrel things, so we could sell tasting kit, a kit where you can buy the 1, 2, 3, 4 plus borrowed page. And we were also like, we don't have the wherewithal to launch a brand and also figure out the logistics of that. So luckily, Ann Dimmick, who again we met from Watershed, she has since moved on from Watershed. She works for Ohio Liquor, but she's got a lot of experience with blending. We had 0 experience with blending. And the closer and closer and closer we got to the point where we actually had to make this thing, the more and more nervous and anxious I got about our ability to do it. So, I reached out to a couple people, but eventually we were just kind of like, why don't we ask Ann just to see? She was into the idea early on, you know, she's not at Watershed anymore. I don't know if she'll be able to do it or if she can do it, but like, why not? And again, luckily for us, just like, you know, tons of enthusiasm for Anne. And, you know, Anne came from Campari. She worked with Wild Turkey. She's the barrel master at Watershed. She helped, you know, she worked with Marion Eaves on the Watershed Eaves Blind thing. And maybe I think on another blending project with Marion. So a lot of cool insight that we actually got from Anne, both from her personal, you know, sort of approach to blending, but also giving us some, you know, secrets from Marion Eaves as well, who, you know, we're hoping to get a chance to chat with soon. But, you know, she was the one who really came in and was like, the goal, like the aim of this has got to be to dump, you know, the whole barrel in here. And, you know, with some of her guidance, I think we were able to get to a point where we were able to do that. So every single drop of whiskey that we bought is in these
went
bottles.
into the blend.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I will just to elaborate briefly on that, right, is the quality of the product was always our primary mission, right? If we thought it compromised the quality of the product, then we would have never done it. What we realize is when you have, you know, all of these different barrel selections, you know, on a palette, so to speak, and you're trying to create something, there's an infinite outcome, you know, number of outcomes. And so many of them are fantastic. But we needed to, for economic reasons and for practical reasons, like there are amazing solutions that actually did require 100% of each of the barrels that we selected. And we said, let's focus on those quality blends versus trying to figure out, all right, this is 5/7 of this barrel and, you know, 7/12 of that barrel, right? I'm trying to think of things that don't reduce down. Because like, if we went down that path, we would get lost in like, oh, but is something maybe incrementally better? And we would have left with this product. It's just impractical. And I think focusing on what is the highest quality product we could do that maximized the whiskey that was out there, and just being comfortable like with what that expression yielded out. And there's a little bit of fate. And I'm so happy that the product came out the way that it did. I think it's unbelievable. And I don't think we needed to tinker on a kind of a fractional barrel basis to get to this quality.
Well, and even with the concept of like, let's use everything that's in these barrels. Well, first of all, that's a guessing game a little bit when you're doing it on a micro level. When you get to the full blend, you learn that there's variation from where we had it, variation on what we thought the proof was going to be, variation on what we thought the final volume was going to be, all that kind of stuff. But even with the concept of let's dump everything in these barrels, I don't even remember how many versions of a blend we went through. We had, you know, we met over Zoom for over several, you know, a couple days. And we came up with stuff on the Zoom, but then all three of us and me, Chase, were also just like tinkering, you know, in the backgrounds. I just had like a full table of like, you know, little glass vials with stuff itched on it. So this version though was absolutely, without a doubt, and the funny thing is the other blends we disagree, whatever. This one, without a doubt, we all agreed was the greatest version of this blend. So I'm very confident in it.
And I think so. You said the Del Bach barrel was smaller, right? Is what you said a few minutes ago. It was a smaller barrel, not a full size 50-gallon barrel or 52-gallon barrel or whatever, right?
Yeah, I have this weird sneaking suspicion that talking with Steven or talking with Mark over at Whiskey Del Bach that they may have moved into some larger format barrels in recent years, but they started off in 15s. Yeah. So this barrel that we bought is a 15 and I think netted like 13.2 proof gallons or something like that.
And the reason I asked that is because I think you might have had a different conversation if you had 50 gallons of Del Bach to put in the blend, because it is a very strong profile. But you know, if you were saying, oh, you know, we're going to be even fourths on all four of these things, it might have hidden a few things.
I would say, just to interrupt, the smoky flavor profile is one that is kind of fickle in its own right. Right, it grows. So, like, you know, even when we blended in the smoked whiskey on day one, it was a little bit more muted, and then when we came back to it, you know, on day 4 or 5 or whatever, when we circled back, it was much more pronounced.
Mhm.
And so like I think either luck or it was fortuitous or by design, like having that being a smaller portion, but it's just such a present flavor profile that it didn't need to be and probably shouldn't have been so much an equal portion.
Well,
Right.
we could have a whole podcast too on how bullheaded I was about which Whiskey Del Bach sample I wanted included in this blend and how wrong I was about it. But yeah, it's.
I mean, how do you know you were wrong? Because you didn't blend the other one in the final product, and the final product always changes a little bit from the initial blends.
John, I mean, they're actually not mostly gone. They're mostly bubble wrapped in a box in the trunk of my car right now. But I could send you some of the samples of the ones I was trying to push with. The cool thing about Whiskey Del Bach is that they didn't only send us whiskey samples, but they sent us like a lot of stuff to play with. So they sent us their classic, which has no smoke in it at all. They sent us kind of which is sort of their blend for their Dorado. The thing that they release is the Mesquite Smoke, which is actually a blend of classic and smoked distillate. And then they sent us the 100% Mesquite smoked sample. And I was like, we're putting the 100% Mesquite smoke sample in this whiskey. And it's when you're blending with smoke, it's an interesting wrinkle to work around because finding the right balance of that smoke is exceptionally hard.
It was great. I too was like initially gravitated towards the 100% smoke, right? Because it's such a big, identifiably different thing, right? We're going to be innovation. We're going to be this. We want to be something that's demonstrably different from mainstream whiskey. Like that's going to bring us there. And what I found, and Devin and Ann, we all kind of picked our own favorites, and we came back and we collaborated. It's like what I learned about is like my favorite, Watershed, and my favorite Wiggle, and my favorite Del Bach, and Spirits of French Lick. When I put them all together, it was the classic story of too much of a good thing, right? Like there was no concept of balance. If we got 100% unedited Chase's flavor profile, then it was like a lot of similar flavor notes that are just competing for attention and no variety out there. And I think that's what we learned, or I personally learned the most, and what made having to compromise or work with Devin's, whose flavor profile is palate's different, and Ann, whose palate was totally different than either of ours. I actually think, just like the whiskey itself, we're trying to create something that's bigger or better than the sum of its part. The blend itself became better than any one of us individually could have created.
So you mentioned that on day one, when you did the blend, the smoke was muted, and then on day 4 it was significantly more pronounced. So when it was more muted, were you like, oh no, it doesn't have enough of that flavor profile? Or did you like come in, did you get the advice like it's going to hit more on day 4, so wait for it? Or did you just have like a moment of like, it's not doing what we thought it was going to do?
I mean, I'm an incredibly anxious person, so I am riddled with anxiety about most all things at most all times. I also, when we were blending, I was a couple months removed from having COVID, and I lost my sense of smell and my sense of taste for 3 days when I had COVID, and I was a complete wreck because I was like, my career is over. Like,
it's over before it even began.
Do this thing. So I was still in a little bit of recovery. So admittedly, my nose had kind of come back, but my palate was still working its way up to full strength. So I had a lot of anxiety about every step of it, but I trusted the process. I trusted Ann. I trusted Chase. And I also just, as somebody who's been around whiskey for a while now, even beyond American Mash and Grain, I knew that it needed to marry. It needed some time, and you can't judge a book by its cover in this case. So yeah, anxiety through the roof. A cautious optimism that it was still going to work out. Sure.
Yeah, I wish we could have the perspective of a seasoned vet, but like, oh, I've blended with smoked whiskey before. Just wait till day 4. That was not the case at all. There was a bit of element of surprise, but I think either by luck or design, right? Like Anne gravitated a lot towards the more delicate flavors. Whereas me, I went if it was whatever the biggest, boldest, heavy-handed flavor profile of the barrel lot was, that was my number one pick of each of these, and I think she kind of had this instinct specifically on the Del Bac piece of finding something that she was like, let's use the not 100% smoked malt grain, and that when come day 4 we had that, like, oh, now we can kind of tell, like, if we'd gone this other direction of the 15 variations, 20 variations that we had, like, that's kind of a difference maker.
And just using my non-whiskey knowledge but logical brain, I would have assumed it would have been flip-flopped. Like the initial blend would have had like present characters, and as they married, they all sort of like settle in together. And so I would have been with you, Devin. I would have been like, oh no, because if this is the peak and it's gonna then mellow down to something else, like this doesn't work. Or maybe it does. I mean, it's probably still delicious, but it's not necessarily giving the character maybe you were after.
Yeah, well, and there's, it's also one of those situations where it's like we had this great concept, right? Everybody loved the concept. The enthusiasm for the concept was big. And then it's like, here's the moment where we have to prove the concept. And yeah, there was a moment where it was just kind of like, this is a really cool idea. Is the reason why nobody has done this is because this isn't actually work. But yeah,
or you have to have like $500,000 to make it work. Like you got to have barrels on barrels to make it. Where you were worried about becoming the DeLorean of the whiskey world is what you were affecting. That was the concern.
Yeah, well, and God forbid, but not that I don't have a deep, love and admiration for Back to the Future, but as an actual functional car, that car, Anyway, digression aside, yeah, I mean,
no, I got a huge digression on Back to the Future, but we won't go that route tonight because Chase has got to get to eat at some point in time.
At some point.
Volume
but it's a good like hour and a half long worth, and it ties into the Infinity Line and time travel and Avengers.
We'll save it for the Mystery Science Theater whiskey podcast version of this that we talked about offline, so no one listening gets the inside joke of that. But it's a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is perfect. I've always wanted to be a part of an inside joke. So the only way that I'll tie this in is I don't know if either of you guys have ever watched The Big Bang Theory very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's an episode where Sheldon's girlfriend points out the fact that in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, if Indiana Jones had not been a part of it, the ending would have been the same, and it ruined the movie for all of them because the ending is the same. They open the Ark and everyone dies except for Indiana Jones, which is what they were trying to get after to begin with. Like they got it, they took it to their location, they opened it, and everyone died. It's along that lines. Is along that lines, but we won't dive into it too deep.
Well, I would prefer you don't ruin Back to the Future for me, so maybe we never speak.
You'll love the first movie, and then after that, it all falls off. Like it all falls off. So you're at 116 proof with this bottle. Is this what the blend happened to be, or did you have to like proof it down? Like say, okay, we got to get it proofed down to a point that this is appropriate for us.
It's a fun story. Another thing that I agonized over, we agonized over, and it's funny. We both loved it at cask strength, which is what this is. Borrowed Page Volume 1 is cask strength. We're not committing that Borrowed Page will always be cask strength, although, we'll see how it goes. Again, we're not putting standards on ourselves, but we all loved it at cask strength. I think for as hot as this whiskey is, it drinks really, really easy. I attribute that to the fact that it's got a ton of flavor in it, so there's plenty to enjoy in Borrowed Page Volume 1, but also, again, with that sort of proof of concept, We do have the Lee Sinclair in there. The Lee Sinclair bourbon has oats in the mash bill. Oats tend to give whiskey a little bit more of a velvety, mouthfeel and texture. I think the Lee Sinclair is helping soften this whiskey at this proof. So, we love the flavor. We love the boldness. We love the texture of it. When we played around with proofing it down, it's really funny. At 110, it changed to something that, we thought was good, just not as good.
Mm-hmm.
At 100 proof, we got back to the flavor profile that we had at barrel strength, but we lost the texture.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was a lot of like, where do we put this? Trying to keep the consumer in mind too, that not everybody loves a barrel strength product. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we tried to do an estimate of what we thought the final volume was going to be once all the whiskey was delivered in Kentucky, once it was weighed and all this stuff. And we did an estimate, and it said, it was going to basically make 835 bottles. We bought 835 bottles. So we were like, well, we literally can't proof it down, because if we proof it down at all, we have juice we've got no glass to put it in.
Right.
Of course, that didn't end up being accurate. We got a 724, so we did end up having some extra glass. But I think this whiskey sings at the proof that it's at. I think it's beautiful. And as a whiskey drinker, and granted, I am a more seasoned whiskey drinker, so maybe my palate is skewed towards something that's higher proof than your standard whiskey drinker. But what I love about high proof whiskey is that if you don't like it at 58.44%, add some water to it. You want to put some ice cubes in this. Like, I'm not precious. Like, drink this whiskey however you're going to enjoy it. And that's the thing, is you can't take something that's already been proofed down. You can't add that texture back into it, like kind of where we were at 100 proof with this thing. So it was kind of like a long, painstaking, like, what are we going to do with this? And we felt like the choice was kind of taken out of our hands, but it was also the choice that we wanted to make anyway. So it was a happy circumstance, I guess.
It's funny. I never appreciated fully the link between proof and price, as a consumer, right? Like, oh, barrel strength, we could just make that as cheap as,
Nope.
It's just not, and I conceptually understood it, right? Like, I understand why that is, but like, producers out there that make so much volume, like, okay, fine, whatever. And so like it gets caught into this kind of head and heart thing, right? Like Devin and I both wanted it at the cash strength, right? We thought for that allowed people to add an ice cube or stand up in a cocktail if they want, and the flavor is so big, but it's so rich and the texture is so good. But then me being on the kind of the marketing sales, business side, I was like, but if we bring it down to 100, which we also like, we get a lot more volume. And I think the uncertainty kind of in those final moments of what our volume was and how much glass we had actually was just kind of fate intervening. Like, no, like, follow your heart and not necessarily your head. And I think it took the decision out of our hands a little bit to really recommit to the underlying, one of two standards that we want to commit to: craft, but ultimately the quality of the product should take precedence over any sort of price point, marketing, volume, whiskey standard kind of decision-making process.
Which let's not avoid another reason why this is a great valued product.
Great value.
Well, you're exactly right, and you'll find whiskey nerds appreciate the fact that it's at cask strength, because exactly what you're saying. Like, Devin, I had it lined out. I'm like, right here, like, we can hit the points. Like, if you want to proof it down, you can. If you want to put an ice cube in it, you can. If you're at 100 in proof and you put an ice cube in it, you're going to be at like liqueur status pretty quick, as it starts to melt down or whatever. But it allows us to taste it at the original intent, and I think we appreciate that. And when you think about, this is a blend of 4 craft distilleries, that are already, you can't find you can but you can't find a good craft. You can find a craft distillery that's pricing inexpensively, but largely they're not going to be great. And by inexpensive, I mean in that sub $30 range, right? So we're looking at 4 distilleries that if you go into the distillery and try to buy a bottle, you're probably going to be spend somewhere between $50 and $65. If I just had to get off the rip, I haven't even looked. You're at that, but now we have to blend this appropriately and rebottle it by some other person, but we're doing it at cask strength. You're making the case for yourself that this is appropriately priced at $75, no matter what. No matter what you say, this is still it. And being higher is likely an easy thing to justify. But I get wanting to make sure you have the authority to say this is good and people believe you. The proofing game is tough. And, I think about Maker's Mark is even addressing this right now. Maker's Mark is addressing this. They put out the DNA series where they're like, we go into the barrel at 110 proof, but we're going to show you what it would be at 115, 120, 125, just to prove what we were already doing is the best. And largely whiskey folks are, okay, we got it. You're right. And so we're starting to trust the people who are putting these things together a little more and saying it's not necessarily a bean counter decision that was made. It's a decision that was made that is, this is the best opportunity for what's going on here. So, like I said, I think that's appropriate. I think it's very, very appropriate. I've got a ton more questions, but I know we have somewhat of a timetable, and we'll go to like a really generic question here, and I'm going to go back without a question. You pronounced that rye from Wiggle. Thank you, because I was looking at that on their website like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, I don't know how that's pronounced, and I've spelled it out phonetically for myself now, so I have it, and I'm gonna put it on a post-it over here, so whenever I eventually get to that, I can talk about it. But what is the most encouraging trend for you in whiskey right now? And I'll whichever one of you guys want to go first, go for it.
I'm gonna jump in because like I said, I'm more coming from the storytelling marketing side of things, and Devin is like got all the actual tasting accolades and whiskey credentials, so I don't want to come second because mine will sound juvenile. I think the most encouraging trend that's going on right now is the distilleries themselves. They're leaning into, I don't want to say terroir because I feel like that's overplayed at this point, but like they're finding grains that are native to their region, and they're finding farmers that are naturally growing those products on their families' lands that they've farmed for a while, and I think they're letting that kind of natural ecosystem of self-identity drive the direction of their whiskey versus trying to conform their whiskey towards an ideal of or a precedence of that already exists. And I really like that for a lot of reasons. One is it creates new things that we wouldn't have otherwise thought about, but it also allows whiskey to be an ecosystem that raises all tides, or tides raise all ships, or whatever the saying is. And I really like that, they're working with small cocktail bars, and they're working with small farmers, and what the product itself tastes like is a literal expression of that kind of local ecosystem of relationships. And I really like that piece of the puzzle that's kind of exists only really in non-commodity craft whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to echo a lot of what Chase said, because I mean, first of all, I really truly am really excited for American Single Malt. We spoke with Clay Risen from the New York Times really early on, and I think we had a really good discussion about what these standards might mean in terms of maybe limiting some of the innovation or something like that. But ultimately at the end of the day, he made a statement. He's like, a standardization, it elevates the category, because right now it's not a category, I think is what he said. And it's just so true. The fact that there will now be a standard, and that American Single Malt is something that will be recognized not only here but around the world. I mean, that's just it's such a cool thing to be. It's such a cool thing to be, alive right now and witnessing something like this happening in America, a new standardized style of whiskey. I think that's super cool. And also to be in the industry, and to feel, not like a part of it, but to be, to have a little bit of a front row seat to it has been truly, truly amazing. But it really is the innovation all across the country that is so encouraging. And I think is honestly if it wasn't if people like the Swansons at Far North in Minnesota didn't do the Seed Vault series with those 1 acre, plots of land where they did 17 or whatever different varietals of rye, all the same way, if Highwire Distilling in South Carolina wasn't basically growing all the same grains, but on 4 different farms and distilling and bottling by farm. So you could actually taste the difference of the same varietal of grain, but just being grown in different soils and different environments. If Mammoth wasn't doing the kind of stuff that they're doing with revitalizing Rosen rye in Michigan and out there on South Manitou Island, and honestly all the cool things that you could talk to Ari Sussman about with like the different what is it, like growth zones or something in Michigan. Like it's learning about this stuff. It's it's Frey Ranch in Nevada literally manufacturing their own peat, like
from their own waste.
Being like what's peat? It's decayed vegetal matter. Well, we're a farm. We have decaying vegetal matter. Like when
it's advanced compost. This is advanced compost is what it is.
When they were telling me about how they manufactured their own peat on the premises and then used that to smoke malt on the that's the kind of stuff that gets me going in whiskey every day. And it's the kind of stuff that makes me excited to tell these stories, because I know not everybody out there is a huge, like, push your glasses up to your head nerd like I am, who's just like so obsessed about the process and philosophy behind making whiskey. But I know I'm not alone. So if anything, to be able to tell those stories of what those people are doing, and honestly, John, like when I saw the thing that you wrote on Instagram today about the fact that you used our website to research interviews for your podcast, like, it was a big, like, honestly, I won't lie and say it was as special as being handed the first ever bottle of this.
I would hope not.
I
would hope that bottle's far more special.
It was extreme. Well, and that's not bottle one, but
okay.
But
when the FedEx man handed Devin bottle number 452.
Yeah.
Hey, this is $6.98. But that was an incredibly special moment, because there was a moment really early on to developing this company and this website that where I said to Chase, I was like, my dream is that one day, American Mash and Grain will be big enough. And I don't mean big enough in terms of like some massive company, but big enough in terms of the archive, in a sense that it's like, you want to know what this craft distillery is about in Nevada and, Washington and Pittsburgh, wherever, Arizona, Ohio, Indiana. You want to know what these people are about? You should probably go to American Mash and Grain. Like, that's what I always hoped the website could be and can be and will be. And so, when I read that today, that was a moving moment. So I think it's just about all the cool things that people are doing out there to advance the conversation about how do you create aroma, how do you create flavor, and how do you create something different.
I mean, I'll plug. I know we've been long-winded on this response already, but just to highlight a point.
I'm here for however long, man. You're the one that's waiting on dinner and a football game. I'm just saying.
I just heard my wife open a bottle of wine, Taboo. I guess on a whiskey podcast, but I think she's okay for the moment.
That's got to air out, buddy.
No. So I had a wine explicit guy on here that wrote a book, has a blog, and has begun the first ever Bhutan wine. Bhutan is a country. in the Far East that they're going to make their own wine out of. So no, I don't get hung up on the whiskey thing. It's interesting people. But go on. Sorry.
Drinking and knowing things. You guys should listen to that podcast. It was a good one.
I'll take a listen. Craft whiskey is not at scale enough really to have a luxury of trends. You're asking what trend are you most excited about? And I think Devin and I both kind of politically skirted the question. And really the answer is like, we're excited about the trend of self-innovation, your self-expression, right? Mm-hmm. Taking a direction. Like when there's a trend in craft beer, day one, there's 100, if not 1,000 plus, micro producers, home brewers, or large producers out there trying to figure out what the next brute IPA is.
Yep.
Right. These things happen en masse. It doesn't, like, whiskey by its current size and really by its kind of prohibitive nature of like the facility and the infrastructure needed to produce it and the laws that prohibit home production of it. Like mm-hmm. things really can't happen in mass trend. And so like, I think what makes me so excited and so infatuated with the craft whiskey movement is like when you hear people talk about what they're doing, even if there's thematical consistencies from distillery A to distillery B, the way it presents itself and what they're doing and how they're doing it is so unique to them. It's really not born out of, oh, I know this person who's doing something pretty similar, so I'm doing something in line with that to create my version of it. No, it's like there is like very demonstrable differences from everything that these people are doing. And so like the overarching trend I'm most excited about is like, just let individuals be individualistic, let innovation be innovation. And like, let's see where we can go and where the boundaries of whiskey can be and quality whiskey production can be in the US.
Mm-hmm. And, I'm with you on that entirely. And I talked about this a little bit on Wednesday, but Alan Bishop does a podcast called Distillers Talk. And it's, in the intro to that, he always talks about like, oh, this is all for like home distillers and people in the distillers industry. And that's the kind of listeners we have. And every time he says that, I slightly chuckle because I am neither of those. And I've listened to every episode for the past like 2 years because it's super interesting. But he has these conversations with people. There was a guy that was on that's talking about land race gardening, and it is basically, the point of the whole conversation was every distiller should be seeking their own grain, their own locally regionalized grain concept. And when you talk to people like Ari at Mammoth, and you hit like 3 of the 4 that you talked about, Devin, are people that I have stolen your research. And maybe I need to start citing you guys, but like just as a common note, like I just need to put as a notation, like stolen from Ash and Grain. But that was where I began, thinking about Ari, thinking about Frey Ranch and, kind of their innovation. And they're like a true on-farm distillery because, farmers are a lot of things. And historically, a distiller was a farmer as well a lot of times because they were trying to find a way to store their grain. And so a farmer is a mechanic, and a farmer is a person who just figures out how to make things work. Like, oh, well, we can make our own peat. That seems like just an abstract and absurd thing to think about. But for a farmer, he's like, it's just another thing I've got to figure out, right? Like, it's jack of all trades, master of none. And I appreciate the responses. That is, yes, that the idea of innovation, most of the times I get a canned answer like American single malt or, and that, yeah, that is exciting. The idea of American single malt, standardizing or whatever, but just the space for innovation in craft whiskey is incredible. It's an exciting thing to kind of seek out and explore and push. And I can't believe you guys said this off air. I can't believe that this is the first podcast you've ever done. I'm sorry it couldn't have been a bigger platform. You absolutely deserve it.
It wouldn't be us if it was, right? It's small, passionate people. Right? That's the community we run in, and we're proud of that.
I suspect that you'll have a handful more. If you don't already have them scheduled, not because of this, but just because of what you guys are doing, I suspect there'll be more people be like, hey, we want you to come and talk. Come be on our YouTube channel, dudes. Come do this thing. But the last thing, and I'll let you go, Chase. You got to go eat. I don't want you to starve to death. You guys have been friends since you were 5 years old. And so you've been friends for at least 16 years. Did you decide, hey, let's start a business together because you wanted the friendship to end? It was like, this is like, it was a good run. We can't find any other way to kill this because we've been friends forever, but let's start a business. Because you could either start a business or like build a house. Like those are 2 of the most stressful things you could do. Are you building a house too together? Maybe like just like
let's not rule it out.
Devin is in the process of moving. You're seeing him in a hotel room.
He's going to
Colorado. Road
so
trip to
he's
his
going
new
like
home.
equally. He's going equally far away from you, just on the other side, right? Because he was in New York. New York to New Orleans is a pretty big distance. Now he's going to Colorado. That's got to be like the same distance, right?
Yeah. Well, my plan is ultimately to get to Colorado, so we will shrink that gap.
Gotcha. Okay, so there's a plan to get there eventually.
Yeah. That way we can when it's time to strangle each other at the end of this, we can be in person, But no, I mean, well, first of all, I'll say let's call it 25 plus years.
Okay.
We'll call that an easy number to throw out there, but
that's closer to what I was estimating because neither one of you look like you're as old as me. So I know that it's got to be sub a certain number. I'm not going to throw that out there either, but that feels appropriate because that's still relatively young.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Chase and I have done a lot of stuff together over these 25 plus years, and if anybody has a recording of Chase's best man speech at my wedding, he will. A lot of them are listed there as. He told everybody that the theme of his speech was going to be about loyalty, and then he just went on a tirade of all the things that I've made him do. In the course of our lives together.
This is what my best man did to me at my wedding speech as well, and it was a family member, but it was a close family member, your cousin that was like a best friend to me, and he was like, "Let me line out all the things that he made me do that could have gotten me in trouble and or arrested."
But I'll say, the theme of my speech when I was the best man at Chase's wedding was about brotherhood. And, I don't have a brother. Chase doesn't have a brother. We both have sisters. And, it's more than a friendship. He is the closest thing that I have to a brother. And, I've done a lot of things on my own and I've done a lot of things with Chase. The things that I do with Chase are always better and more enriching and more satisfying and make my life a better life. So, he'll probably kill me first, but but no, it is a stress, but we started this company in part to be able to stay connected with each other in a pandemic, living far away from each other. There are definitely moments where I'm like, I wish I could talk to Chase about something that doesn't involve this website or this whiskey that we're putting together. But I don't know. I mean, it's a special friendship, and I think I won't call it bulletproof, but if there's anybody that I would rather have kill me, it would nobody else than Chase. So.
Well, I do like my personal odds in a physical altercation. So I can't say if weapons are involved. And to Devin's point, when we went to Kentucky to actually put the juice in bottles, right, in Little Mary, that was the first time Devin and I had, without our families, without a larger group of friends, actually spent an extended period of time together since we were 18 years old. And I really that time, regardless of where Borrowed Page and or Mash and Grain go, right, will be a cherished time because it really did. It's so important to have that kind of time together. The thing I'll say about starting the companies is impossibly difficult. And I think what's really special about this relationship is that we actually are, I think, true complements in our strengths and our shortcomings. The product itself, right, was founded on the idea of can we make a blended product that is better than the sum of its parts? And I think in many ways this relationship is the manifestation of that, which is, Devin has unbridled passion and knowledge for the spirit industry. And, I have this maybe more calm demeanor and more business oriented. And I told him when we got together for the blend is he's the kind of friend that because I have a relationship with him, ideas become realities. Mm-hmm. And I like to think of myself as maybe the kind of friend to him that realities don't destroy you.
Well, I mean, the ideas can become realities. I think the inverse is true. That my wife is an incredibly talented and very artistic individual, and some years ago she got involved with a local community theater, and they're like, hey, we have this community theater and we're trying to do all these fun things for this small town and we want to do everything. But zero of them were looking at, how do we market this, how do we make money, how do we make sure that we can pay the electric bill. Like, there's a part of it where you have to have that. I'm not necessarily saying Devin doesn't have that, but that's how a friendship, it feels like that's how a friendship lasts over time, is that you aren't the same person. Because if you're the same person, you probably would have already murdered each other, or just been like, this ain't it, we'll move on, I'll go find a new friend who's not the same. I really appreciate the time you guys have given. One last thing that the next round, you guys do borrowed page 2. I think you can probably triple your price if you provide small 50 or 100 ml samples of the barrels that went into it and make a blending kit for them, and just say,
very
like,
much
it's a $75 price for the bottle. It's $300 to get the blending kit, and see if you can beat our blend. And if they can beat your blend, then you know to hire that person to help you with the next barrel.
It's a Willy Wonka situation.
Because I think I've had the guys from Penelope on, Mike and Danny, super guys, but they let people build their own blends. And they didn't say this, I never asked them this, but I can only imagine, like, if they had somebody come in and put a blend together to do a custom blend and then sell them, they taste it like, this is amazing. Like, call this guy back. Let's bring him back. He can help us blend something else, so you can crowdsource your solutions or whatever. We're at an hour. Like I said, we're at an hour, 40 minutes. We've got you guys have things to do. I've got to go wash clothes for a trip. We didn't even get back to the American single malt conversation. There's more here. We'll do this again. I mean, provided you guys want to. I mean, y'all are going to maybe about next month, y'all are going to be like, oh, we're doing Bourbon Pursuit all the time. We're on the big guys. Like, I don't even, Fred Minnick is coming to our house and hanging out or whatever.
Return my calls, Kenny.
The thing is, he just might, because they can't let a small guy find something good. They got to make sure that they come in with their own spin. But I appreciate your time. I'm going to dump you out. I'll hit the outro, and then if you'll hang out for just a minute, we'll just wrap it up. I appreciate you guys for being here. If you got any final parting words aside from mashandgrain.com, go buy the bottles. Buy one bottle, you get the equivalent of 4 single barrels. Within that, it's a fantastic value. Buy 4 of them, free ship at cask strength. At 4 of them, you get free shipping. And there's a plethora of useful information on the website to begin with. If you are trying to steal information for your own podcast or website, it's a great place to go. You got anything else you want to add to that?
Oh, I mean, mashandgrain.com, at mashandgrain, pretty much anywhere on social media. Also, part of the whole point of this, Watershed Distillery, Columbus, Ohio, check them out. Wiggle Whiskey, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, check them out. Spirits of French Lick in West Baden, Indiana, check them out. And Whiskey Dalbach, Tucson, Arizona, really special distilleries for a really special first release.
Yeah, I'm going to continue our quick name of everyone we appreciate for reading the sword.
Bluegrass Bottling. Don't forget Bluegrass Bottling.
Bluegrass Bottling. Paradise Distributors down in Florida, Primo Spirits down in Fort Lauderdale. Josh Duncan did the artwork, and Blair Posteri did the design for the label. All right, there we go. Even if they're not a part of the blend, if they're a local craft producer, you should go check them out. Go take that initiative on.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to know anything about any of the companies that are blended in this, you go to Mash and Grain. Then you follow the link to the Borrowed Page album, or the Borrowed page. And then on that, it actually has links to Watershed, Spirits of French Lick, Wiggle, Whiskey Dalbach, and there's long form articles. They're worth it. Go read it. Like, be a whiskey nerd, join in with us, go learn more about it. And then you can jump over to the websites, go buy stuff from them. You need to buy one of each of the bottles from each one of them, so that way you can compare, like, how did they make this blend? This is a way you can do it. And then just imagine the next time when they do it, if they can provide you a smaller sample, cheaper than each one of the individual bottles, you can do that. You can learn a few things. So I truly appreciate you guys for joining me. I know it's it's a sacrifice of time. It's incredibly appreciative.
My pleasure. Thank you, John.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
All right. So thanks for tuning in to this offering from the Embellish Podcast. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media at Twitter or Instagram using Embellish Pod and give me a follow, or you can keep up with what's going on here. I can also be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, contact details, and more. I'll be back again in a couple of weeks with a new offering for you. So until then, cheers and thanks for hanging out.